Catholic Church is in a state of upheaval tonight. A newly released letter by a former Vatican ambassador to the U.S., Carlo Vigano, claims that Pope Francis and other top officials of the church knew of the allegations of sexual abuse against Cardinal Theodore McCarrick, the Archbishop of Washington, and they knew it for years. What's the real story here? For more, we're joined by Raymond Arroyo, managing editor of EWTN News, who's covered the Vatican for decades, and a Fox News contributor. Raymond, who are these? Who is the main whistleblower?
Well, Archbishop Vigano, who you mentioned earlier, he was the nuncio, the ambassador to the U.S. for the Vatican here for about 5 years. He also ran all of the embassies around the world for the Vatican.
Well respected.
Before. Very well respected. Man of integrity, a sharpshooter, and a man who has been a whistleblower in the past. In 2011, he wrote secret letters to Pope Benedict at the time, outing corruption in the Vatican. Those were leaked and became the Vatileaks scandal. It was his exposés, meant only for the Pope's eyes, that got worldwide attention.
So why is he releasing this letter?
Well,
he's 77 years old.
He claims he wants to unveil his conscience. He can't go to his death with the information he has, and he sees the corruption and the double dealing in the Vatican. He's exposing it. His allegation, the principal one, is that between 2009 and 2010, Pope Benedict imposed a penalty on Archbishop McCarrick because he knew they had paid settlements to men that he had abused. He also took him out of public ministry. Now, when Pope Francis became Pope, Vigano claims he informed the Pope himself of McCarrick's misdeeds, and the Pope ignored this and restored McCarrick. That's the charge.
That's the allegation, and some others are vouching for Vigano's credibility.
Well, we should put up the full screen. I want people to see this. This is a full screen from the letter of Vigano. Watch this. It says, Francis knew from at least June of 23rd, 2013, that McCarrick was a serial predator.
What?
In an extremely dramatic moment for the Universal Church, he must acknowledge his mistakes, and in keeping with the proclaimed principle of zero tolerance, Pope Francis must be the first to set a good example for cardinals and bishops who covered up for McCarrick's abuses and resign along with all of them. He's calling for the Pope's resignation and for all of these people.
This is exploding all around the world.
It's
this
huge.
is coming on that big family meeting in Ireland, which was not well attended, by the way. Here's the Pope reacting to the news on a plane returning from that family conference in Ireland.
I read it, and I will say sincerely that I must say this to you and all of you who are interested. Read the document carefully and judge it for yourselves. I will not say one word on this. I think the statement speaks for itself.
Well, many Catholics are saying it speaks for itself, and they feel the Pope should have done some disclaimer, said something. It looks like an evasive answer and makes the Pope look bad. In the meantime, bishops around the United States and the world, Tyler, Texas, Arizona, and the entire Conference of Catholic Bishops say these are credible charges that need full investigation. They're demanding that from Pope Francis.
Could this lead to the ouster of a pope? That's never happened
Well,
before.
we'll see. Look, there's no mechanism to do that. So we'll have to see. We'll continue on this.
All right. Fantastic, Raymond. Thanks so much.
Blue skies, warm weather, and fresh air. At Malibu Lagoon State Beach, you can forget about the fresh air part.
It's disgusting.
Absolutely disgusting.
Beyond terrible.
That's because of the stench of hundreds of dead fish littering the lagoon. The mass die-off first noted Thursday. Then it continued through the weekend. California State Parks employees, armed with rakes and protective suits, snagging the dead mullets and, no joke, dead smelt from the shoreline.
They're going to bag it up, and we'll take them up to the landfill.
All the dead fish are coming out by the truckload. The big question now, what caused this? Well, wildlife experts think it may have been the weather.
Water temperature is 82, 83, 84 degrees, somewhere in that range. What we've had is many days in a row of warm, sunny weather. Typically down here on the coast, you would have weather that is more foggy and keeps probably the temperature down.
Craig Sapp is the superintendent of the California State Parks Angeles District. He says oxygen levels in the lagoon are right where they should be, but several of the fish have been sent to labs to check for other reasons for the die-off.
It's very specific tests they're taking as far as the water is concerned. It may take a week or two.
In the meantime, the popular beach is not so popular anymore. Pinched noses, all too common. The stench forcing some tourists to find other things to do.
I live here, but my mom is visiting and I wanted to show her the beach, but the smell is just, we just cannot stay. It's impossible, it's unbearable.
Unbearable, and to some, false advertising.
Wildlife reserve. They're not preserving things very well.
In Malibu, Rob Hayes, ABC 7 Eyewitness News.
Now, a magnitude 5.9 earthquake has rocked Iran's western province of Kermanshah and parts of neighboring Iraq. The quake was centered in the town of Taziabad at the depth of about 8 kilometers. Several emergency teams have been dispatched to the area. There have been no reports, though, yet of material damage or casualties. Temblor has also rattled the Iraqi capital, Baghdad.
But when you see a swarm of them in your house, it can make you want to cry. And judging by all these home videos sent to us by our viewers, there's plenty of tears.
Residents are calling us regarding invasions of ants in their houses. Numbers are high.
Very high, says Gavork Arakelian. He's an entomologist for the LA County Department of Agricultural Commissioner. The reason for a sudden surge in ant encroachments? The recent heat waves that torched Southern California over the past month and a half. Arakelian says the hot weather dried up the ants' food and water sources, and now they're heading into your kitchens and bathrooms. But he says you can ant-proof your home by keeping plants and soil away from your foundation.
Create a barrier, and that could be gravel about like 5-6 feet from foundation of your house, or it could be just a cement sidewalk.
But if the ants are already inside your house, don't reach for that can of ant spray. It may feel like you're winning the war, but it's just going to kill the ants that are physically hit by the spray.
The problem is not eliminated. The queen is alive somewhere outside in the soil, and the ants will succeed. I mean, they will come back.
Pro advice? Grab a bunch of these bait stations.
Liquid baits do two things. They give them water with food. So if they are coming for both, let's say water, they get both.
Place them in the middle of the ant trail and let the worker ants bring the poison back to the queen. Queen dies, so does the whole nest.
Predators, sometimes they collect a lot of pests from your garden.
But most of the time, they're just plain nasty. In Southgate, Rob Hayes, ABC 7 Eyewitness News.
Like a state dinner. That's what participants are saying about the scene at the White House tonight. But the president was not honoring foreign dignitaries. The focus was on evangelical leaders. As we mentioned earlier, the president made some news there tonight saying he appreciates the work of Senator John McCain. But that's not all he had to say. Pastor of First Baptist Dallas, Dr. Robert Jeffress, the Fox News contributor, was there. He joins us tonight live in Washington. Good to have you on set with us tonight.
Good to be here in person, Shannon.
Okay, so tell us about this dinner. I understand the president talked about your support, evangelical support of him, and what he's tried to do in return.
Well, he did. And, I guess the headline from the evening would be evangelicals remain enthusiastically supportive of President Trump. And, the headlines that we've all seen recently, I knew they wouldn't affect my support of the president, but I did wonder how it might affect some others in the room. Well, the answer is there's no effect. I mean, this was a beautiful state dinner organized by the First Lady, but it almost turned into a campaign rally. I mean, leader after leader stood up and spontaneously started talking about why they supported President Trump. And Shannon, I know a lot of people are still perplexed. Why are Christians so supportive of Donald Trump? Well, it's really not that hard to figure out when you realize he is the most pro-life, pro-religious liberty, pro-conservative judiciary in history, and that includes either Bush or Ronald Reagan. I think that's why evangelicals remain committed to this president, and they're not going to turn away from him soon.
Yeah, I mean, August polling that we have just, within days, it said, do you approve or disapprove of the job Donald Trump is doing as president? White evangelicals said this, approve 74%. 25% disapprove, don't know, 2%. That is a resounding yes from that particular group. But you do understand the questioning, the criticism from people who say this is not what you would ever do as a leader of your church. You would preach against much of what the president's done in his life. Is that a fair trade-off for you then on the judges, on the issue of abortion and those other things?
Well, first of all, Shannon, to be fair, we have to understand these are still allegations against the president. So I'm not going to judge the president on these things. But even if they were true, some of these allegations, I mean, obviously, we don't support extramarital affairs. We don't support hush money payments. But what we do support are these president's excellent policies. And I think most thinking people can absolutely differentiate between the two. And don't mistake what's going going on here. Those who hate President Trump, those on the left, know that if they can dislodge his evangelical supporters from him, they have a shot at overtaking the White House. And so I think the left is trying to shame people like myself continuously for supporting this great president. It's not going to work. We're not going to turn away from him.
I want to read part of something on salon.com and give you a chance to respond. They said that there's a double standard where straight white men can do whatever they like and everyone else must face a stern crackdown on sin. It's long been baked into the religious rights ideology. It goes on from there.
Well, I think it's absolutely wrong. I preach about sin every Sunday, and I haven't changed my convictions at all. But, you know, it's interesting. The president tonight at the dinner, he quoted me. He said, you know, Pastor Jeffress often says Donald Trump isn't a perfect Christian, but he's a pretty good leader. And that's true. I've said that. The fact is, Shannon, none of us is perfect. The whole basis of the Christian message is we're all sinners in need of a Savior. And the good news is anyone who asks for forgiveness can receive it.
Well, the president said in the past that he hasn't asked for forgiveness. Have you had conversations with him to see where you think his heart is on these kinds of issues?
You know, I've known President Trump for now 3 years, and I consider him a great friend. We were together in the Oval Office this afternoon, but I made a deal with the president early on. When we became friends and he wasn't president, I said, you know, when Mr. Trump at that time, I said, when people ask me about your faith, what should I say? He said, Robert, you can tell people my faith is very important to me, but it's also very personal with me. So I never go beyond that in talking about it.
Well, you make a good point that we are all in need of forgiveness at some point, and for me, every day. Pastor Jeffress, thank you for joining us. Good to see you tonight.
Thanks, Shan.
Russian Ministry of Defense is warning that jihadists are planning to stage a chemical attack in the Idlib province of Syria. RT correspondent Dan Cohen has the story.
It was just 5 days ago that U.S. National Security Advisor John Bolton warned the Syrian government against use of chemical weapons in its offensive to liberate Idlib province from the jihadist militants who took control back in 2015.
If the Syrian regime uses chemical weapons, we will respond very strongly. And they really ought to think about this a long time before they come to any decision.
It's the final battle that would bring an end to 7 years of bloody conflict that have ravaged the country and sent millions fleeing. The Syrian army is deploying units around Idlib, prepared for fierce fighting with thousands of militants from Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, the militant group formerly known as al-Nusra Front, or the Syrian affiliate of al-Qaeda. U.S. naval forces are said to have moved into the Mediterranean in position to make good on Bolton's threat. The Russian Ministry of Defense says the USS Ross is loaded with Tomahawk cruise missiles. The White Helmets, the al-Qaeda-linked group who somehow are always present for alleged chemical attacks, are said to be ready to film with high-definition cameras supplied by USAID. Back in 2015, these White Helmet members celebrated the takeover of Idlib by al-Nusra Front. The Russian MOD says this attack would be used as pretext by the US, UK, and France for strikes on Syria. If that sounds like a familiar script, that's because it's eerily similar to the sequence of events that led to the US bombing of Damascus back in April. As the Syrian army neared liberation of eastern Ghouta from occupying jihadist groups, an alleged chemical attack left 40 people dead, before the Organization for Prohibition of Chemical Weapons could visit the site to take samples and determine if any chemical attack had even occurred, let alone who was responsible for it. The US, UK, and France launched more than 100 airstrikes on Syria. Trump administration officials claimed certainty that a combination of the nerve agent sarin and chlorine were used. However, the OPCW fact-finding mission's interim report on the alleged chemical attack found no trace of sarin, and while it did find chlorinated organic molecules, it didn't determine quantities, leaving the possibility that it's a trace amount that could be found in such mundane items as drinking water. Despite the lack of evidence and clear rush to bomb, Nikki Haley said the U.S. was prepared to do it again.
I spoke to the president this morning, and he said if the Syrian regime uses this poisonous gas again, the United States is locked and loaded.
Reporting in Washington, Dan Cohen, RT.
The United States State Department informed Congress that the Trump administration had decided to cut more than $200 million in aid to the Palestinian Authority, following a review of the American assistance earmarked for the Gaza Strip and the West Bank. The announcement underscored the fact that Hamas controls Gaza, an Islamist group that is recognized as a terror organization by the United States, was the main reason for the administration's decision. In response to the American move, Palestinian officials condemned President Donald Trump and his administration for what they termed blackmailing the Palestinian people.
الولايات المتحدة الأمريكية وإدارة الرئيس ترامب تحاول ابتزاز والضغط على الشعب الفلسطيني. هذا القرار بقطع أموال المساعدات ما فيها 200 مليون الأخيرة نحن كنا نتوقعه تماما في إطار سياسة الابتزاز والتهديد والوعيد التي تمارسها الولايات المتحدة الأمريكية وفي سياق أيضا محاولة تمرير ما يسمى صفقة القرن.
A White House official rejected the Palestinian condemnation, explaining to TV7 that the Palestinians cannot reject all U.S. involvement in mediating a solution to their conflict with Israel, refuse to meet with Trump's administration officials, and incite against Washington on a regular basis, while on the other hand expect continued financial support from the United States. The American official stressed that the ongoing Palestinian attitude, in which they think that they can spit on the hand that feeds them, is over. That is why, aside from a sharp cut in aid to the Palestinian Authority and a previous slash to the budget allocated to the United Nations Relief and Works Agency for Palestinian Refugees, UNRWA, the White House intends to announce soon that only 500,000 Palestinians will be recognized as refugees rather than the 5 million people currently recognized by the United Nations. The move, which is expected to be publicized at the beginning of September, will disqualify the right of return for millions of Palestinians whom UNRWA considers refugees by no longer allowing refugee status to be inherited, as has been the UN's body policy to date. In addition to this step, the United States is reportedly expecting to ask Israel to reconsider UNRWA's mandate across the Palestinian territories in order to prevent it from receiving funding from Arab states. Now to another matter. Despite the relative quiet that has been maintained between Israel and the Gaza Strip over the past 2 weeks, Israeli defense officials describe the current situation as very unstable time due to what Jerusalem perceives as an irresolvable deadlock in the intra-Palestinian dispute. Furthermore, the Israeli officials claim that the chances that the Palestinian Authority will be willing to lift its financial boycott of the Hamas-run Gaza Strip are very low, and thus Israel is preparing for possible violent consequences. Nevertheless, Egypt continues to apply pressure on both Hamas and the Palestinian Authority to resolve the difference. To that end, representatives of Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas arrived in Cairo this morning for talks with their Egyptian counterparts, while Hamas officials are expected to travel to the Egyptian capital tomorrow. That said, efforts are being made by Israel's National Security Council Director Meir Ben-Shabbat through various channels to move forward a long-term ceasefire agreement between Jerusalem and Hamas in the Gaza Strip do not have a high chance of bearing fruit. According to various reports, the Israeli leadership does not believe an agreement is possible without the involvement of the Palestinian Authority, which according to separate assessments has an interest in maintaining a conflict between Israel and Hamas. Meanwhile, Israeli Defense Minister Avigdor Lieberman has denied the report that attempts are being made to reach a ceasefire with Hamas. The Israeli top defense official said during a visit to an Israeli village next to the Gaza Strip that he is not involved in any discussions vis-à-vis a ceasefire agreement, and that in his view, the only truce arrangement is the reality on the ground.
The UN says military officials in Myanmar should be prosecuted for genocide, accusing them of the gravest crimes against Rohingya Muslims. The minority group, which numbered around 1 million at the start of 2017, are not regarded as citizens in the Southeast Asian country.
Gross human rights violations,
rape, gang rape, sexual slavery, forced nudity, and mutilation
are the gravest crimes under international law.
We didn't receive any cooperation from the Myanmar government.
We are deeply disappointed that State Councillor Daw Aung San Suu Kyi has not used her position or her moral authority to stem, prevent, or condemn the unfolding events in Rakhine State.
Over the years, Aung San Suu Kyi, the country's de facto leader, has repeatedly denied any ethnic cleansing taking place. She also blocked the UN fact-finding mission from accessing the area in 2017. Despite that, she's been seen as something of a hero in the West. She previously won a Nobel Peace Prize and a U.S. Congressional Gold Medal. Hollywood even made her life story into a film, and top world leaders called her an inspiration.
The power of your example, which has been an inspiration to people all around the world, including myself.
A fearless champion of human rights and democracy.
Your example and your perseverance in your beliefs is a huge inspiration to people across Britain and people around the world.
Clearly, you will be playing a key role in your country's future for many years to come. So thank you for your inspiring message.
We spoke with Marzuki Darusman, the head of the UN fact-finding mission in Myanmar, who believes that the country's leader has ignored the atrocities in the region.
When you use terms like ethnic cleansing, which I think is a little extreme, I don't think there's ethnic cleansing going on. I think ethnic cleansing is too strong an expression to use for what's happening.
The state councillor would have been able to do more than what she hasn't done. Aung San Suu Kyi was clearly derelict of her responsibilities, and we registered disappointment that she did not use her moral authority to do something about this, either to stop or to stem, draw up policies that needed to be there to address.
The UN considers the Rohingya the most persecuted minority in the world and calls the situation a human rights catastrophe. As the result of military offensives against the minority, at least 392 villages have been destroyed and thousands killed. The UN also stresses cases of women being gang raped and children assaulted. Marzuki Darusman again says the atrocities are a consequence of systematic oppression.
This is a tragedy that was just waiting to happen. And therefore, the facts that we've assembled clearly shows a gradual buildup of discriminatory policies against a very specific community there, the Rohingyas, and that therefore this might have reached a high point. It has been a problematic situation for so long that it was just only time that it would then erupt into this horrific tragedy.
Well, the Bill of Rights is a stumbling block on the way to shutting down speech that the left doesn't like, at least in government. But there's a new avenue for those who would like to censor what you say and think, and that's corporations. The left have wised up to this. If you want to stop someone from telling the truth, use companies to do it, the social media giants, and they are. So far, the most prominent casualty of the crusade against free expression has been the radio show host Alex Jones. But are we smart to think censorship will stop with him? Mark Penn is a former advisor to Bill Clinton. He is a liberal who still believes in the free exchange of ideas, and he joins us tonight. So thank you, Mark, for coming on. So I'm fascinated by the Alex Jones story because it was Alex Jones. Almost no conservatives rose to his defense because the idea was, well, Alex Jones, ew, yuck. But it's not really about Alex Jones, is it? It's about the idea that companies can make it impossible for your voice to be heard. Is that a precedent we should be comfortable with?
Well, I really think you have to be worried about big tech becoming Big Brother.
Yes.
Because these used to be neutral platforms that said, we're open to free expression, that's our core value. And now they've said, well, not so much, with particularly Facebook hiring 10,000 new censors on top of another 10,000 and having roving censoring bots looking for content. Look, I never read Alex Jones, but here's somebody with millions of followers, publicly accountable for his speech, operating within Supreme Court standards, yanked from the media. That's a surprise to me. That says that these platforms are no longer as open as they presented themselves to be.
And it's not just him. There are many like him who've been yanked, lesser known, but still. So this has political implications. You ran and managed campaigns for so long. This must have occurred. a lot of our political debate takes place on social media platforms. So if they clamp down on one side of the debate, why wouldn't that influence an elections outcome?
Well, obviously it could have a big influence on elections, increasingly because where people turn for their news is that they look at the news feeds that are run by the major social media companies. And so they're more powerful than any TV station, more powerful than Fox.
Yes, they are.
Because of the amount of time that people spend, and it's a funnel. So if you're not at the top, you don't get seen. And so in the past, they had some neutral ways of doing this, but now they've increasingly applied still more mysterious algorithms plus individual censors. And remember, they're private platforms, they say, so they're not actually subject to the First Amendment unless we get some legislation here that says free speech is an internet right.
Well, it's totally meaningless. If I own a toll road, I can't say anyone of a certain race can't drive on my toll road. And so they're not actually fully private companies. We have a public interest, I would say, in keeping them free and open. Why aren't, if you cared about the integrity of our elections, why isn't Congress acting?
I don't know why Congress isn't acting. Part of it is because to stand up to a social media company means you could have 5 million people on your doorstep the next day. So I think there's been a lot of intimidation in Congress instead of bipartisan agreement that, hey, we cannot have this kind of regulation of speech where whoever runs one of the big platforms can pick out speech, which speech goes and which speech doesn't. Not when they've been exempted from the libel laws, when they've been set up as open platforms, and they now become media companies instead. And that's exactly what's happened. They become media companies that take ads on the media that they run, and they have editors and algorithms and bots that run it.
I really believe that 10 years from now, this segment, what you just said, will be seen as prescient. I mean, I think this is a big story that's being ignored by virtually everyone for reasons I don't fully understand. Maybe you're right, it's cowardice, but it shouldn't be. Mark Penn, thank you for that.
Thank you.
A new study is sparking concern around marijuana usage by breastfeeding mothers. The study found THC in mothers' milk, breast milk, and THC is the mind-altering ingredient in marijuana. Experts say it has chemical properties that could enable disruptions in brain development. Now, the study involved samples from 50 nursing mothers given to researchers at the University of California, San Diego, but experts say more research is still needed on the subject.